Dennis follows all of the government guidelines on nutrition, including the ones on salt intake. He's been diligently consuming all of the media propaganda on how salty our food is these days. He thinks we're living in a time where we're eating more salt than ever before. Because he avoids salt wherever he can, he lives a miserable existence, where all his food is bland and his health is deteriorating. He doesn't even own a salt shaker. Oh, Dennis. Then there's Dexter. He follows his natural instincts and reviews the science for himself. He doesn't get mired in the distortions and omissions of establishment media and institutions. He's read up on his history and knows that salt has played a very important role in human history. They never always had refrigerators and freezers to keep their food fresh, so they had to rely on something, he says. Dexter's food is always full of zest, and so is his life, because he's not afraid to sprinkle some salt on every meal. I'm Jared. Today I'm going to talk to you about the insane amounts of salt our ancestors ate, why they ate so much, how they got their salt, and how the body is perfectly capable of handling large amounts of salt. Let's dive in. For reference, the average American eats about 8.75 grams of salt per day, whereas American official guidelines state that we should only consume 5.75 grams of salt per day. So first we have the ancient Romans, who ate 25 grams of salt per day. Ancient Roman soldiers were even paid in salt. We all know how powerful the Romans were. Their high salt intake clearly did not hold them back. Then we have 16th century Europeans who ate about 40 grams of salt per day. And then we have 18th century Europeans who ate 70 grams of salt per day on average, mostly from salted cod and herring. Then there is 1725 France, and people there at that time ate about 13 to 15 grams of salt per day. And in 18th century Zurich, Switzerland, they ate about 23 grams of salt per day around the same time. 18th century people in Denmark ate around 50 grams of salt per day. And the best for last, in 16th century Sweden, they ate up to 100 grams of salt per day, mostly from salted fish and cured meat. That's over 17 times what we're told we should be eating. Why didn't all the Swedes get heart attacks and die, if eating so much salt is so bad for us? It should be clear that our ancestors got along just fine eating lots of salt. There was not an epidemic of heart disease going on then, but arguably there is one going on now, and we're told to eat way less salt than our ancestors ate. In fact, the first case of heart disease ever recorded was in the mid-1600s. High blood pressure affected only 5 to 10% of the US population in the early 1900s. In 2004, however, that number was 31%. American salt consumption has only went down or stabilized over the last 100 plus years. This is probably due to the refrigerator being invented in 1913. So why did the people of yesteryear eat so much salt? It's because they ate a lot of fish, fish eggs, olives, cured meats, eggs, and pickled vegetables. These were all saturated with salt to help them preserve their freshness for as long as possible. They didn't have refrigerators like we do. Salt would keep food fresh for weeks to months. According to a report by the American Institute of Medicine, salt preserves food by 1. Reducing the availability of water that microbes need to grow. 2. Pulling out water from microbial cells, causing them to die or slow their growth. 3. Limiting oxygen and enzymes for the microbes. And 4. Wasting microbes' energy, which they need to use to rid themselves of excess salt. Here are a couple of examples of how influential salt can be on how long food lasts. A manufacturer reduced the proportion of salt to water by 34% in their bacon. This caused the bacon to go from lasting 56 days to only 28 days. In other words, reducing the salt cut the shelf life in half. There's research also showing that a certain strain of bacteria would grow when the salt concentration was 2.85% in a product, but when that was increased to 5.5%, it was impossible for that kind of bacteria to grow. So where did our ancestors get all this salt that they needed to preserve their food? We can start with salt mining in China, which is estimated to have begun 8,000 years ago. Salt mining then spread to many other countries after that. Other methods ancient and medieval people used were drilling brine wells and boiling the brine to get salt crystals, extraction of salt deposits from dry river beds, evaporating seawater from man-made lakes and ponds, mountain salt mining, salt extraction from desert soil, salt extraction from the burned ashes of marsh plants, and simply boiling water, marsh water, and peat to get salt crystals. So our ancestors ate loads of salt and had many ways of getting it, but how could their bodies handle all this salt that they were eating that was way more than they need? There was actually a study done where people with normal blood pressure were made to consume 86 grams of salt per day, 10 times the average amount an American eats. They were able to excrete all the excess salt through their urine. Here's an interesting quote from the study. Our subjects were faced with excreting massive salt loads. Even at the highest level of sodium intake, homeostasis was achieved in a relatively short period of time. The urinary sodium excretion approached the sodium intake after 72 hours. End quote. In other words, the human body is able to adjust quickly to even an extremely high salt intake by simply passing salt through the urine. Fun fact, the kidneys filter 3.2 to 3.6 pounds of salt every day. This is a basic fact of physiology. And we think that eating 10 grams of salt instead of the recommended 6 is going to matter. I hope you see now how normal it was for man to eat much more salt than we do. It has been vitally important for our survival throughout history. And yet, establishment institutions make it seem like the amount we eat now is far too much. What absolute nonsense. Stop fearing salt. Free yourself from your salt-restricted prison and see for yourself what eating more salt can do for you. If you would like to support me and my work, smash that like button, subscribe, and drop me a donation or question at my Buy Me a Coffee link in the description. The more you can help my channel, the more we can help the world become healthier.